Well, good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. I'm Andrew Sargent and I've been a reference librarian here at the NLA since 2000. By the way, the image you're looking at is of Andy Cunningham and his sisters, taken around 1920, probably at the family's property, Lanyon. Canberra locals will know the place well. Now, the aim of today's session will be to show you how using our collections of local and social history in a range of formats can help paint a richer picture of the lives of your ancestors, to fill out the basic details of dates and places that you may have already had from your genealogical research. Maybe it'll help you to understand things like why they moved or why they changed jobs and how they lived. Now, there's a fair bit to cover, so I'll get straight into it. Don't forget that you can submit questions to Heather and me during the course of the webinar, and we'll try to cover at least some of them at the end. Now, this isn't going to be a history lesson, but I thought I'd give you this brief timeline of the history of Canberra to get things going. As I mentioned a minute ago, knowing what happened and when in the place where your ancestors lived can be really helpful as you try to add flesh to the bare bones of birth, death, and marriage records in your family that you might already have. Your ancestors may well have been involved in some of these events in some way, which will give you further avenues of investigation. A quick example might be the opening up of the country to railways, where your ancestors, like some of mine, were railway workers. So it could be a worthwhile exercise for you to put together your own timeline of the places you're investigating, even if they're not very detailed, such as this one. So you can see this one for Canberra starts with the evidence of Indigenous Australian habitation in this region going back to at least 25,000 years ago, found in the Tidbinbilla Nature Reserve. Several different tribal groups lived around the region, namely the Ngunnawal, Ngambri and Walgaloo peoples. Now, for those interested in Indigenous genealogy, I'll show you where to find a guide shortly. That will be a good starting point. So, 1820, we have the first European explorers led by Charles Throsby in several journeys from what's now Lake George, reaching the Molonglo and Murrumbidgee rivers. In 1824, the first European to actually purchase land here was Joshua John Moore, who never actually lived here but established a farm named Canberry. It took in what's now most of Civic, the ANU and Acton Peninsula. In the 1830s, further farms were established. Palmerville, Pialago, Yarralumla, Duntroon, Oaks Estate, Tuggeranong, Lanyon. You can see how some of these names are from long before the actual capital city of Canberra was established. 1845, the first church opened, St John the Baptist at Reed, which is now Canberra's oldest building. In 1863, the post office was established. In 1887, the railway from Sydney finally connected through to Queanbeyan. In 1900, a Royal Commission was established prior to Federation to decide on a site for the new national capital city, separate from Sydney and Melbourne. And in 1908, the decision was made by Parliament to locate the capital city at the proposed Canberra site. In 1909, the Federal Capital Territory was created from New South Wales transferring of land to become Commonwealth Government land. In 1912, an international competition to design the new capital city was won by American architects Walter Burley Griffin and his wife Marion Marnie Griffin. And in 1913, the foundation stone was laid for the city. The first sale of leases of Federal Capital Territory land was in 1924. In 1927, Parliament moved from Melbourne to Canberra with the opening of the interim and Parliament House, and we, as the then Commonwealth Parliamentary Library, came with it. Now, after the Second World War is when we really start to see Canberra develop into what we have today. And apart from what's on the timeline on the screen, you have things like 1946, the ANU being founded. Woden started to be developed in 1964, Belconnen in 1966, Tuggeranong in 1973, and Gungahlin in 1991. Okay, now a little bit on what we do. The library's role, as defined by the National Library of Australia Act 1960, is to ensure that documentary resources of national significance relating to Australia and the Australian people, as well as significant non-Australian library materials, are collected, preserved, and made accessible. In short, our mission is to collect, connect, and collaborate. Now, here's what our homepage currently looks like. I'll click through to the live site and quickly show you some of the important features to look out for. This is how our homepage currently looks. And if you scroll down a bit, you've got the link to the catalogue for searching collection material within the library. You've got a link to Trove and to eResources, and I'll go back into those in a bit more detail later. There's information under Getting Started that's useful for people who aren't familiar with the place. The link to Get a Library Card. Now, if you don't already have one, it's very well worthwhile getting one, even if you're not based in Canberra, because the card will give you access to electronic resources. And this Ask a Librarian tab, this is currently the preferred way of contacting the library during the close down. If you click through to the Enquire Now button, that will start up an online form for you to fill in, which will come through to us in the reference section, and it'll then be allocated to the most appropriate section of the library to respond to. Also on the home page, right up the top, we've got lots of drop-down tabs, and under Using the Library, you'll see a lot of information there. Research guides, family history research, a link to our learning sessions, information about the reading rooms, getting copies, and more. There's also much more information under the other tabs too that you can have a look at later. Okay. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to point out our online research guides. You may have seen the link a second ago. From the home page, there's a link under the Using the Library tab for research guides. These include many family and local history related topics. And again, I'll click through to it now. There we are, they're listed alphabetically. So you can see the very first one there are all photographs. I'll mention a bit of those later. Lots of family history related items. One on Indigenous family history that I mentioned. Indigenous language collections, the Australian Joint Copying Project. Maps that'll be very handy for you in a few minutes. So lots and lots of interesting topics. And these have been put together by our reference staff, and I would really recommend them to you as a first point of call before you do any new research on our website. Now I'm going to spend the next little while showing you the variety of things you can find in our collections through the catalogue to help you fill out the story of your Canberra ancestors. Before I go any further, I should stress that while this session is about Canberra, if you're not from around these parts, you can apply the same techniques to searching for material in our collections relating to your locality. I'm also going to mention books and other physical items in the collections, but as nobody can actually get in to see them at the moment, I'll also be showing you what you can access online through the catalogue, Trove, and eResources. Okay, to begin, I'm going to show you a few tips on searching the catalogue. What we're doing today is really a crossover between local history and family history, so I'll be doing a little of each. Probably the most obvious starting point is to search for your particular family's name and see what comes up. Many of us might have a family member who's already given us a head start by publishing a family history. And the library has thousands of these in our collections. most of which will be available for interlibrary loan to your local public library if you're not a Canberran. If you know of such a book, it's easily found by an author or title search. My own family is an example. My mum's cousin published 2 volumes on the McGuinness family. If anybody, any of you out there know any McGuinnesses around this district, especially around Queanbeyan, then they're probably my lot. So a search for the words McGuinness family will bring up these 2 books. I'll just quickly go into the catalogue and show you how I got them. I'll put the spacing in right. So they're the top 2 there. And as you can see, there's also 40 odd hits for other works in the collection about McGuinness family. Now there's the 2 books there. And you can see my very handsome great-great-great-grandfather Duncan and his father Gilbert, the patriarch of the family. Here they are again, listed on the catalogue with all these other ones. So those 40 odd hits are for people who are not my family, and therein lies a bit of a hurdle for you. You may not be looking at the right family at all. We have over 150 entries in the catalogue for Smith family, for example. So how do you get around checking through all of these individually on the off chance that one of them has something on your family? Thankfully, there are people out there who've dedicated themselves to helping with this quandary. They create bibliographies of family histories. In Australia, one researcher in particular, Ralph Reed, embarked on a long-term project that at its conclusion listed over 9,600 family histories that were published in and relevant to Australia, with an index of almost 450,000 surname or title entries, and a supplementary listing of related place names, and an index of 26,000 surnames listed in selected pioneer registers. Ralph periodically deposited his work with us on CD-ROMs, each updating the last, as well as in print. Now, these aren't widely held in libraries, but we'd be happy to check our copies for you if you put a query in through our Ask a Librarian service that I showed you earlier. Now, what if your family history hasn't been published in its own right? The family name might not appear in a catalogue record, but you know that they've been long-term residents, so they could well be mentioned somewhere. Well, there are locality-specific biographical registers and indexes, often produced by the local genealogical or historical societies, such as this one for Canberra and Queanbeyan, produced by HAGSOC. Now, a good search term to use in this case is the word pioneers. A subject search, you can see that I've changed the search method from the default all fields to subject. For the words pioneers Queanbeyan or pioneers Canberra, will bring up a number of examples. This particular one contains 112 pocket biographies of pioneer families, about a page on each. And although their names don't appear in the catalogue record, there's some of my McGuinnesses at one of the family homes, Mungula, long ago demolished, near what's now Cowan Forest. The men in the family were apparently very proud of their bikes and rode in local bicycle club competitions. So how do we go a bit further, for example, into where our ancestors lived and how they lived? This is where we cross back over into the realm of local history. This time, I'm going to do a basic keyword search for the term Canberra history. And you can see I left it on all fields, which is like a keyword search. But this results in almost 10,000 hits. Far too many to handle. This search looks for both words, Canberra and history, in all the fields in the record: title, author, subject, publishing details, and any notes fields. This is the broadest possible search, but it will pick up lots of results that won't be relevant. The default sorting is by relevance ranking, similar to a search engine, which puts those results with both words together to the top. So you may get some good results on your first page, but by the last page, a search like this will throw up a lot of meaningless results for you. So the message is, be careful when doing an all fields search. It might work well for some searches, but not for others that incorporate commonly used words. So a good way to narrow it down straight away is to change the search method to subject. And you can see there, I've now changed it from all fields to subject. And this straight away has the effect of narrowing it down to just over 1,200 hits. Still a lot, of course. Now, you can also sort your results by date, author, or title if relevant. I've sorted this list by date, oldest to newest. And you can also use the narrowing options on the right-hand side to further narrow things down. In this case, the format and eResources options might be particularly useful to see what's been digitized that you can access off-site. Now, another way of being more specific is to use the hot-linked subject headings in a catalogue record. You can see this example has quite a few subject headings. These are assigned by cataloguers according to a global standard called Library of Congress subject headings. The technical librarians speak for this as controlled vocabulary. You don't really need to remember that. Just remember that this system allows you to use a standardized term across most library catalogues anywhere in the world. If you're in a record like this, simply click on the link to see more on the same subject. Now, while it's a global system, it is based on US cataloguing rules, so you'll need to keep in mind that it contains American terminology. For example, it might use words like ranches instead of farms in the subject headings, or railroads for railways, etc. So if you're using subject searches, just be aware of that. Now, some other things I'd like to note before I leave this record. Cite this link. That'll generate citations in 3 different styles, or send it off to EndNote, which is very handy if you're creating a bibliography or writing an article. You can email or print the pages as well, of course. The Add to Favorites link, when you're logged in with your card, this will let you keep and sort as many catalogue records as you want to indefinitely. That way, you can come back to them at any time without the need to write down details. The online versions link there. This one usually goes to a digital version on the publisher's website, which may no longer exist. So you'll see options there to look in Trove, the Wayback Machine, or Google. In this case, the site was the Canberra 100 site that was created for the Canberra Centenary in 2013. And as is the way of things on the internet, this site doesn't exist live anymore. But if you click on the Trove link, you go through to the Trove web archive where you'll actually get a PDF copy of the book. This field is also where there would be a link to an ebook version of a publication if it was deposited with us, which might be accessible off-site depending on the access conditions set by the publisher. Now, the series field there, if you know the title of a series, in this case, Keys to Canberra's History, and you want to see what else was published in that series, use the Advanced Search tab up here. Select Series from the drop-down menu and type or copy and paste in the name of the series. And that will bring up the rest of the titles in the same series for you. Check the Notes field, if there is one, for any information about the item that might be important. The Similar Items box over at the right can be another good way to discover related results. It's computer generated based on common keywords that it's found in the records. So it may or may not find things that are actually relevant to your particular search. And the Find in Other Libraries link here drops you straight into Trove and does a search for the item to let you see where else it might be held. Okay, now I want to show you a bit more on subject searching, which is the best way to locate material if you know what to do, rather than just searching for random keywords. You can simply use combinations of the subject heading terms in the basic catalogue search screen and change the search method to subject. This will find records that have these terms just in the subject field, which will usually bring up adequate results for you. You might remember that I did this a little bit earlier when I narrowed down my keyword search for Canberra history. But to do a more methodical and precise search, click on the Browse Alphabetically tab. I think the best way to show you this is going to be live. So I'll leave the slides for a minute and go back to the website. I just hope it works. Okay. So there's my results for Canberra history, and as you can see, I've got 1,200 results. If I click on the Browse Alphabetically tab and select subjects, and now I start typing in one of those Library of Congress subject headings, you can see it starts wanting to drop me in at that place, at that point in the list. And you'll see it'll start going chronological, and then from there alphabetical. And Canberra ACT will have most of the headings. Some of them will have more than one subheading. And the more headings, the narrower the subject focus of that work is going to be. And then you simply click on the previous and back arrows, previous and next arrows, sorry, to go back and forward through the list. And you can keep going as far as you want. So try the same for, excuse me, try the same for Queanbeyan. Drops you in at that point. And again, it starts off with Queanbeyan age, various societies and clubs. Again, works about them, treated as a subject. Gives you related notes that might be useful. And then it goes into the geographical, again, which is where most of the headings are going to be. And again, as I mentioned before, do this for whatever location you're interested in. So if I do it for, say, Bathurst, it starts off with the Bathurst 1000, because numbers come before letters in this system. And then it starts going into alphabetical listings and people with the name Bathurst. There's one, a use instead heading. So if you use the wrong heading, it might suggest to you which one is the right one to use. And if I went back and narrowed it down a bit further, Bathurst NSW, it's now skipped a few pages and put me into the Bathurst, the headings for Bathurst, the location. So this is a much more methodical way of using the subject headings, and it might give you some subheadings that you wouldn't have thought of previously. And as I mentioned, you'll sometimes also see things like preferred headings if you've typed in the wrong term, or see also notes that can give you other related headings to try. Okay, so back out of here for the moment, and back to the slides. Here's just a few suggested subheadings that you can use. They work for Canberra or Queanbeyan specifically, but of course, try them the same method for whatever location you're interested in. There's many more that you'll see as you work your way through the catalogue as well. And of course, the larger the place that you're interested in, the more headings and the more likely you're going to find something. And here's a list of a few of the subheadings to try after a geographic location, such as Canberra, ACT, or Bathurst, New South Wales. Again, the number of results you'll get, of course, will vary depending on the place you're interested in, but these are some of the more commonly used ones. And you can see a lot of those are directly relevant to family history research in one way or another. Now, I hope you're enjoying some of these watercolours that I've been throwing into the presentation. This one's of an old German settlers farm on the Molonglo River that's long gone. And the land is now under Lake Burley Griffin, not far from here. If you have anyone in the family who may have farmed along the Molonglo Valley, there's a book that will be a very handy reference tool. It's called Lost Houses of the Molonglo Valley, Canberra Before the Federal Capital City. Published in 2007, so fairly recently. Now, in that book, the author Linda Young has incorporated a map laying out the locations of the farms covered in the book, all the numbers there. You can see Linda has overlaid the old course of the Molonglo River on top of a modern aerial photo. Number 16 there, you may, Canberra locals will know that this is where the library is. So number 16 is just on the lawns down next to the lake in front of the library. Now, as it happens, the previous owner of that farm was my Irish convict, great-great-great-grandfather, one John Crinigan. It actually belonged to his second wife. His daughter married a Corkhill. And for the locals, yes, the same Corkhills who now run the landscaping supply business. So working at the library, it feels like I've really actually come back to my roots, literally. Just quickly, old Crinigan was an interesting character. He came out from Ireland on the Waterloo in 1837, was assigned to G.T. Palmer of Palmerville, now in Ginninderra. And then after marrying and getting his ticket of leave, he built a stone hut at what is now Amaroo. Its foundations have recently been excavated and it's part of the Canberra History Trail now. Now, which brings me on to our pictures collection. We have a large collection of historical and modern images of Canberra, many of which are digitised and available through the catalogue. If you're looking for a particular place, an easy starting point is simply to type in a location and limit the search format to picture. For example, Tharwa, Lanyon, Tuggeranong, Griffith, Woden. Now, we also have modern collections, not just historical items. For example, by Louis Cecilia, that I'll show you in a minute. Here's a shot from Mount Ainslie. You can clearly see the Sydney and Melbourne buildings in the middle distance and Northbourne Avenue coming up to them, with Reed and Braddon developing quite well. This image is from the DeSalis, Farrer and Champion families photograph collection. Now you can download any of these low-res images straight from the catalogue for personal use or study through the Trove viewing screen. If you click on the thumbnail image, it'll take you through to that, and then you can download them or print them from there. Now, with items in formed collections such as this, or photos and albums that have been individually digitised and catalogued, you'll see extra links in the catalogue record, such as this one. There's a link to the parent record for the collection as a whole, and below that is the link to see all the individual child records in that collection. So in this case, it's, as I say, from the DeSalis, Farrer and Champion families photograph collection. And if you clicked on the collection record link, that will take you to the record for that whole collection. And by clicking on the child link, You can see here that here's the first few child records for that particular collection. A note over here under your eResources, the entire collection has been digitised and is accessible online. Now, I mentioned the modern photographs. There's one from 1996, shot by our staff photographer, Louis Cecilia, who also took the photograph of the library that you would have seen at the very beginning of our presentation. Louis worked with us for several decades and took thousands of photos, a lot of which are now digitised and online because we own the copyright. Okay, on to our manuscript material. Now, the manuscript collections in the library contains diaries, letters, notes, unpublished material. And for the Canberra region, we also have some quite rare family farm business records. Manuscript materials are, of course, usually considered as primary source documents in historical research. So as it says in the slide, best place, start with the catalogue using a family name, or maybe a relevant subject heading, and limit your search to manuscripts. Some of them will have an online finding aid, and I'll show you that in a second. If there's no online finding aid, you may need to use our Ask a Librarian service to inquire further. Examples specific to Canberra and the region include the DeSalis family, Cunningham family, the Faithful family, Samuel Shumack, the Reverend Piers Galliard Smith, Terence Aubrey Murray of Yarralumla, which locals will know now as Government House. The manuscripts collection is quite complex and very little of it is digitised or accessible online. It often needs the mediation of expert members of the manuscripts team. So I'd suggest that in most cases, you might need to use that Ask a Librarian form to make initial inquiries if you're after anything from this area. But I'll quickly show you an example of a catalogue record and the accompanying finding aid. So it's rather a long record. This is the record for the papers of the DeSalis family from roughly 1840 through to about 1930. You can see it's a decent sized collection. It's 14 metres of shelf space, which is how archivists and manuscript librarians describe the size of a collection. There are over 50 boxes, and it indicates that there are permission requirements for some of these before you'll get access to them. So again, this is where you'd need to contact manuscripts via that Ask a Librarian form to go further. And there's also additional notes in this case about associated related materials that might be useful. Now you also see up here the link to the finding aid, which will give you a detailed listing of the contents of each box. And you'll need to refer to this finding aid if you wanted to order copies of things or use them in the reading rooms. Here's what the first part of the finding aid itself looks like if you click through that link. And again, you can then scroll down or click on links in the table of contents to get more detailed descriptions of the contents of each. And you'll see now you're starting to get box numbers indicated. Okay, on to maps. Now our maps collection is the largest in Australia and there are many maps of the Canberra region. Again, the easiest way to begin a search is to use a place name and limit the search to maps. I'd also suggest that you check our detailed research guides on maps that I showed you earlier to get the most out of your research. And of course, use the Ask a Librarian form to contact our map staff for further advice. Town maps like this one show the first title holders of smaller town allotments. This one's of Queanbeyan, and there's also a very good one of Braidwood from the same time. These examples also show dwellings and significant buildings in the towns. Many of the houses and buildings on the Braidwood map are actually still there. Pastoral maps will show squatting or pastoral runs, while parish maps were created by lands departments to register all land holdings and will show more detail. Title holders, size of the block, portion number, and a purchase registration number, and other useful geographical information, which you can then use to request historical land title searches at the relevant state or territory lands department. Many of the older maps are now online, and these are a great boon to local and family history in showing the occupiers of runs and registered land title holders. Your starting point will be to locate the parish within a county. If you're not sure of this, you'll need to use a gazetteer. For pastoral runs, there are gazetteers for each state, mostly published in the 1860s and 70s, while Gleeson's list of New South Wales place names is the most comprehensive guide for parish and place names for New South Wales. These are both online, and again, see the Australian Maps for Family History Research Guide for links and more information. While in Wikipedia, there's a very handy article titled Lands Administrative Divisions of Australia that lists all the land divisions state by state. We also have a terrific collection of real estate sales plans, advertising subdivisions from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. This one's of Ainslie in 1927. For 20th century research, we also hold a huge collection of aerial photos, I think from memory starting in the 1920s. So again, try a catalogue search for a place name, plus the word aerial, and limit the format to maps. Now I'll quickly show you what I meant about pastoral maps versus parish maps. Here's the section of a pastoral map for New South Wales and part of Queensland that I've zoomed in to show the part covering the Canberra region. And as you can see, there's not a lot of detail. It's good for putting a land holding to the larger geographical context though. So parish maps are probably going to be of more use to most of you. Here's an example of the catalogue record for a map of the parish of Guru Yaroo in the county of Murray near Queanbeyan. And this is what it looks like when I clicked on the thumbnail to go through to the Trove viewer. And when I zoomed in to look at more detail, what do I find but my old ex-convict ancestor, John Crinigan. Officialdom always had trouble spelling his name, probably the thick Irish accent that he had, but that's definitely him. And as you can see, he's holding a few parcels of land there, right next to a larger block that was assigned to his former master, G.T. Palmer. So that really says something, I think, about how Australia developed into an egalitarian society, when an ex-convict could end up owning land right next door to his former master. I also found lots of other family names on this map, including my McGuinnesses and others that we're related to through marriage, like the Bingleys and Southwalls, Rowleys and others. So these maps can be a real goldmine of information for family historians. Okay, I'll move on to oral histories. Now, oral histories in the National Library may not necessarily be the first thing that may come to mind, but our oral history and folklore collection is a rich and deep source that is increasingly easier to access as it is being digitised and made available as audio files through the catalogue. There are several Canberra-related oral history collections, including those listed here, many of them done by local farming families, such as the Oldfields, the DeSalis family, the Southwalls, Cotters, the Jeffreys, as well as many by politicians, senior public servants, and ordinary citizens. So for those that have been digitised, there will be a link to listen to the audio. You should also look out for the timed notation at the side if available. And some have a printed transcript that is keyword searchable and linked directly to the audio, which is a real advantage. Oral histories that haven't been digitised or have restricted access conditions are accessed in the Special Collections Reading Room. To find more in the catalogue, use audio as a search limit. Now, you will need to be aware of permissions attached to the oral history that you wish to use. These conditions will vary, so check the catalogue record carefully. and also use the parent-child links that I mentioned before to go from collection level records to the individual interviews. And once again, contact the oral history staff for advice via that Ask a Librarian form. Now here's just a sample of what you can hear. I hope it's going to work for us. I'll click through to it. This is a small portion of Mr. Oswald Woodger, interviewed in 1971, whose father had the first petrol station in Kingston, and he remembers the start of the Fishwick industrial area and early businesses. So I'll click on the listen online. I've read all the terms and conditions and accept them. And here you can see now you've got your timed transcripts. I think I'll scroll down a bit, find. I might go with that one.
Oh yes. That place, as I've just mentioned, was known as the Garden City Service Station. And the registered name, I don't think anybody else could get the name, but however, well, I was in these businesses for a few years until 1931, until the Depression hit everybody, of course. And my father and my uncle and Mr. Calthorpe and a few other people who were interested in the business, they lost their capital, and eventually they were wound up, I think, and leased out to other people. From there, my father thought that I...
Okay, that's probably enough of that. You can listen to more later, of course. Okay, quickly on to our eclectic collection of ephemera. If you're unfamiliar with the term, ephemera are transient things that are often not intended to last. Postcards, menus, pamphlets, tickets, invitations, programs, catalogues, greeting cards, timetables, flyers, orders of service, stickers, badges, bookmarks, trade cards, and even plain old junk mail. We've got it. For Canberra, this includes things like Federation and the founding of the city and their centenaries, advertising material, area guides, booklets, postcards, posters, t-shirts. You can also look for ephemera from businesses, organisations, societies, etc. For example, here we've got the Hotel Canberra, the Canberra Theatre, Canberra Rep, the Canberra Philharmonic Society, the Canberra Show, the Grammar School, Canberra Golf Club. So if your family were involved in any events or were members of societies, you could find little treasures of information that you just won't get with other formats. A simple way to find this material is just to use the words Canberra or your location and ephemera in a basic search. I'll click through and just show you an example. So I've searched for a keyword search for Canberra ephemera. And now if I restrict it to just NLA digital material to see what's online that anybody can access. And here's the laying of the foundation stone in 1913. There's the catalogue record for it. And again, there's a formal subject heading, Printed Ephemera Australia, which is very broad, which is why in this case it's probably more precise to actually use a keyword search with a location and the word ephemera. If I click on the thumbnail and go browse this collection, this brings up the items within that particular collection. You can see there's a few there. This one here has 8 children or 8 pages within it. And there it is, there's the program in all its glory. And if I scroll down a bit further, you'll see, let's see if I can pick it up. Lady Denman naming the city. And of course, they weren't quite used to spelling the word Canberra yet. So it's spelt with 1 R all the way through the program. Okay, on now to newspapers, which of course can be an excellent tool for research. We're lucky to have much of Canberra's past available in Trove, but there are also other ways to access newspapers. We hold a very strong collection of papers relating to the Canberra and southern New South Wales region, as well, of course, as papers from all around Australia, in print, on microfilm, and online. With newspapers, you might need to be prepared to follow the name change trail. For example, the Queanbeyan Age went through several name changes from 1864 to 1927. It was the Queanbeyan Age and General Advertiser. Later it became the Queanbeyan Age and Queanbeyan Observer. It has now, of course, virtually disappeared after merging a few years ago with the Chronicle. Now, there'll be separate catalogue records for each name change, but you'll see former and later titles in the records to help you navigate your way through. It's also important when looking in the catalogue to check the holding section of the record under the In the Library tab to make sure we actually hold the issue that you're after, because there are frequently gaps in our holdings, especially for the 19th century collection newspapers. Generally in Trove, Australian digitised newspapers cease at the end of 1954 because copyright still applies after 1955. Although we do have the Canberra Times through to 1995 in Trove. Otherwise, there's very little online in Trove post 1954. You'll get the Sydney Morning Herald archives, which go up to early 1995. You'll get those through the eResources portal that I'll show you in a minute. But otherwise, for this period, you'll need to go to microfilm until from the 1990s onwards, you can go into things like Newsbank through eResources, which is available from home. So it's good to be aware of that gap between when Trove ends and the beginning of the online newspaper databases, when manual searching in microfilms or even print is necessary. But don't forget, if you're not Canberra based, microfilms can be sent to your local public library via interlibrary loan. We run regular learning sessions about newspapers using all of the different formats, as well as a Trove newspapers session, so I won't do too much more on newspapers now. But speaking of Trove, I'm betting that most of you will be familiar with Trove to some degree, especially with the newspapers zone. Again, I'll only briefly touch on this because it can be a whole session in itself. Once again, we do run regular sessions on Trove that you should keep an eye out for. Something that catches a lot of people out on Trove is that while it's hosted by the NLA, it's actually a collaborative national project with contributions from hundreds of libraries, museums, archives, and other cultural collecting institutions around Australia. So look at it like a collection of collections. And if you find something in Trove that you want to reproduce, you'll need to approach the institution that holds the original material. If it's not ours, we can't give you permission to use it. You don't need a library card to use Trove, but you can create your own Trove account to get extra features. And don't forget that it is more than just newspapers. It lists books, journals, manuscripts, government gazettes, pictures, maps, audio, archived websites, lists and tags created by other users. You can also restrict your searches to only online material. Now, just quickly, here's a couple of results from a search of the newspapers for my old convict forebear, John Crinigan, to show those of you who may not be familiar with Trove and how the newspapers look. Now, here's the results after I searched for the phrase John Crinigan. You'll see that there's an article about the remains of his stone hut in Amaroo. A couple of entries in the New South Wales Government Gazettes. There's 6 results altogether for that. Mostly about contract tenders that he'd submitted. And there's about 34 results for newspaper articles. And if I go to the newspapers, here he is in the Queanbeyan Magistrates Court in 1863 on charges of assault. Now, the original newspaper wasn't very well printed, unfortunately, so the scan's a little blurry, but you might be able to make out some of it. They were down at a pub called Woodman's Inn where there was singing and dancing going on. And he burst into the room and let one of the singers and dancers have a bit of a mouthful on how badly he was doing. And it turned out into a bit of a melee. So he was fined £1, and the magistrate said that at his age, he would have been about 44 by then. He should have known better. Here he is in 1868 on slightly less serious charges of breaching the Diseases in Sheep Act. And he was, the charge was withdrawn, but he had to pay the inspectors and expenses of 10 shillings. And there's a few more instances where John gets on the wrong side of the authorities. But by the time we see his death notice in 1899, he was now a man of sterling character and held in the highest esteem by all classes in the community. No mention of his convict past or his brushes with the law. So it seems like even then you couldn't believe everything you read in the papers. Okay, on to briefly our eResources portal. So this is where you come for access to licensed subscription-based electronic resources, such as ebooks, full-text journal databases, historical and current newspaper databases like Gale News Vault, the London Times Archive, Newsbank. It has links to other websites. And of course, our genealogy databases, Ancestry and Find My Past. Now, 80% of these resources are accessible off-site, either as free websites or through your NLA card, which is another reason to get one if you haven't done so already. With the library being closed at the moment, the eResources portal will be well worth exploring. For those new to the site, I'd suggest you look at the short video under the Help tab to get you going, and I'll show you that in a sec. If you've previously used our eResources, but not for a few months, you'll see that it has changed quite a bit. The site is now almost totally keyword searchable, except for things like Ancestry, Find My Past, and a couple of others, meaning that you don't need to search individual databases separately. You can do a keyword search across the whole site and get results. However, you can still navigate around the site like you could previously to individual resources using the Browse eResources tab. Now I'm going to click through to the live site and give you a very quick look. And it's worked for me. Now, again, I would need to accept the terms and conditions before I can go any further. There's the Help tab with the little video that explains how it all works. Under the Browse eResources tab, for those who've used it previously, there's the Browse by Category feature that you might be most familiar with. And if you click on the little plus symbols, it gives you narrower topics within them. So there's one for genealogy ACT. Not a great deal of stuff in there, I'm afraid, but there's a link to Find My Past and other things. And you can see the little symbols next to them indicate the type of resource they are. So that is a little globe icon. That's just a free website that you don't need to register for. Find My Past has the library logo, which means it's only accessible within the building. Other things with the gold keys are what you access through your card. You can also search alphabetically. If you know the name of the database that you're looking for, so if I go to A, well, I'll get rid of genealogy first, go to A, and that lists all the resources beginning with the letter A. There's a very large full text journal database called Academic Search Complete, covering a huge range of subjects. And again, you can see the variety of material. And there's a link to Ancestry. Okay, now I'll do a very quick keyword search demonstration that shows you how to search across the site. I'm just going to search for Tuggeranong history. And that's brought up 206 results, which you can narrow down by various methods again, similar to what we do in the catalogue or trove. And I'm just going to pick that first one there, the Tuggeranong town that never was. It was published in the Canberra Historical Journal, which of course we have in print in the collections, but this way you can get straight to it in full text. And there it is. From here, you can of course download onto your device or print the article out. And there is what Walter Billy Griffin envisaged for Tuggeranong. It was going to be a military arsenal, which never eventuated. Now again, I just want to stress that there's so much in the eResources portal on all sorts of subjects. And again, you can read ebooks or download full text articles from offsite if you're logged in with your card. Ancestry and Find My Past will have a lot of the records that are otherwise normally available in the building in our family history area. These will include things like records for births and baptisms, marriages and divorces, deaths and burials, inquests and probate records, directories and almanacs, land records, electoral rolls, 19th century census, convict records, immigration and shipping records, and more. Now, you can access Ancestry or Find My Past through your own personal subscription. We can't do that, but we can do limited lookups on our subscription for you if you send us details of the person you're interested in via the Ask a Librarian form. But please be aware that we can only do up to an hour of genealogical research for you, so please don't send us lists of names, and we can't undertake ongoing research on your behalf. Now, a final word on getting copies of our wonderful collection material. Firstly, if your local public library is still open, they may be able to get books or microfilms from our collections, or even elsewhere in Australia. They do that via the interlibrary loan system. There's usually a fee for this service, so ask your library to arrange this, and they'll tell you whatever fees are involved. Instead of borrowing, you can of course look for secondhand copies of books on the internet via one of the many bookseller sites out there. I can suggest a site called Books and Collectibles, where many Australian booksellers list their stock, and a site called Via Libri for international searches, which also covers the Australian sites. Our Copies Direct service is another alternative. Use it to buy copies of our collection material that you can't copy for yourself. For example, most special collection items, or if you need higher resolution images, or of course material from our general collections if you can't borrow them. Most things can be copied within copyright allowances and permissions, and exemptions may apply for some purposes such as research and study. This is the Copies Direct page. There's a link to it at the very bottom of our home page. And you can see, to start an order, you can click on that Describe the Item cartouche, and it will start up a blank order form that you fill in. But the easiest way to order a copy of something from our collections is to go through the catalogue record itself. At the bottom of any record, click on the Order a Copy tab. Or if you're in the Trove viewing screen for something, use the shopping cart icon on the left-hand side. The order form will then be populated with the details of the item automatically, which saves you a lot of work, and you then complete the form online. A credit card is required. Now, if you're not sure about copyright, check in the Copyright Status tab. We also have information on copies and copyright under the Using the Library tab on our homepage that I showed you right at the beginning. If you're still not sure, or if the record says copyright's undetermined, I'd suggest that you put the order in regardless, and our Copies Direct staff would then contact you if there were any copyright or other issues to deal with. And your credit card would not be debited if they can't fill the order. Okay, lastly, Don't forget that we're only one of a number of institutions that will have materials related to Canberra's history. Here's the list of some of the main ones to consider, with links to their websites. Of course, unfortunately, all are currently closed to the public, but their sites will have varying degrees of online content to explore. And while I'm at it, I know that the societies would welcome new members if you're interested in joining. HAGSOC, the Heraldry and Genealogy Society of Canberra, has an excellent research library for members. And it also publishes a very useful guide to doing your research called Family History for Beginners and Beyond, which is now into its 16th edition. You don't need to be a member to buy it. And again, there's a link to that on their homepage. Another interesting one there that many of you may not be aware of is the Capital History Here website, which has only been going for a couple of years. It has regular articles on Canberra history, updates on Canberra in the news, and hosts a new project called Canberra 100, which over this year will tell the story of Canberra through 100 objects. And that kicked off with the iconic Canberra red brick. Well, that wraps it up for me. Thank you all for staying the distance with me, and I hope it's been useful to you.